The chain bit my wrist when the princess pointed at me. I still remember the sound before I remember her face. Not her voice. The room. Soft metal chimes in the high vault. Silk brushing polished stone. The faint hiss of station vents cycling cold air through a chamber too grand for honest breathing. I stood below a ring of nobles with my hands magnet-bound in front of me, an imperial prisoner dragged fresh from the military decks, and every eye in that court had already decided what kind of animal I was. Human. Male. Captured alive at the border war. Useful until disposal. The overseer announced names I barely cared to hear. Officers in lacquered black. Household ministers wrapped in silver thread veils. Physicians. Servants who kept their eyes lowered but still looked at me when they thought I would not notice. At the center of it all, elevated by 3 shallow steps and a discipline so cold it felt ceremonial, stood Princess Lyra Vale. She looked less like a ruler than a ghost someone had dressed in moonlight. Her skin was pale even for her kind, almost luminous under the suspended globes. White gold markings traced the line of her throat and disappeared beneath a collar of rigid pearl fabric. Her hair, braided close at the temples, hung like a dark sheet over one shoulder. She wore no crown. That was the first thing I noticed. No crown, no visible weapon, and too many guards for a woman supposedly being honored in her own residence. House arrest, then, quiet enough to preserve appearances. An old courtier opened a case of identity slates and bowed to her. "Your Highness may select from the approved station guard," he said. Approved. The word nearly made me laugh. Along the lower dais stood 6 of them, imperial veterans, household sentries, men and women bred inside the machine and polished smooth by obedience. Tall, armed, trusted. Their armor carried the crest of the ruling line. Mine carried dried blood in the seams, and a prison number burned into the chest. The princess stepped down one stair. No one breathed. Her gaze moved over the chosen guards as if she were measuring statues. Then it moved past them, past the case, past the courtier's careful smile. It landed on me. A murmur spread instantly, sharp and insect-fast. The overseer stiffened. "Highness," he said, with the kind of caution used near unstable reactors, "the prisoner is not among the approved options." "I did not ask for approved options," she said. Her voice surprised me. Low, precise, no tremor. It had the stillness of a blade laid flat on a table. The old courtier folded himself deeper. "He is a war captive. I can see that. He is human." That almost changed her expression. Almost. One corner of her mouth moved by the width of a breath. "Yes," she said. "I can see that as well." A few nobles actually looked offended. I kept my face empty, but my mind was moving. Fast. Why choose me in public? Humiliation? Theater? A test? A condemned man can be used in 100 ways on a station like this, and none of them end clean. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "What is his name?" No one had used it in days. The overseer answered for me. "Prisoner designation K-117. Human Auxiliary Officer Elias Voss." Her eyes stayed on mine. "Remove his chain," she said. "He will stand watch outside my chamber tonight." The chamber erupted without ever rising to a shout. That was how power sounded here, controlled panic under etiquette. Advisors stepped forward at once. One military aide protested security protocol. A matron in layered silk spoke of contamination, insult, precedent. Another suggested a neural leash. A third suggested sedation. It struck me then that not one of them asked what I might want, only whether I could be made harmless enough to display. Through it all, Lyra Vale did not look away from me. I had seen commanders do that before battle. Not the look of trust, the look of commitment. A decision already made and carried to its end. At last the station prefect, a narrow-faced man with ceremonial scars at his jawline, turned toward me like I was a stain requiring legal wording. "If the prisoner is placed in the royal wing," he said, "the responsibility for any breach falls upon him alone." That was not procedure. That was preparation. For a corpse. For blame. The princess answered before I could. "Then let it fall," she said. The magnets in my cuffs disengaged with a hard metallic click. The sudden lightness in my arms felt stranger than the chains had. 2 guards seized me anyway, one on each side, and began marching me toward the inner corridor beneath the silent stare of half the court. I glanced back once. Lyra had already returned to the upper step. Motionless. Untouchable. But as the doors began to close between us, I caught something under the polished calm in her face. Not fear. Expectation. As if she had just thrown a knife into the dark and was waiting to hear what it struck. The first thing I learned in her wing was that everyone wanted me close enough to accuse and far enough to abandon. The royal corridor curved like the inside of a blade. White walls, gold inlay, hidden light bleeding from seams in the architecture. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and some floral resin burned in ceremonial braziers set into the alcoves. Too clean, too controlled. Even the silence felt managed, as if the station itself had been ordered not to make the wrong noise around her. I walked between 4 armed escorts, wrists free but not trusted, while every servant we passed flattened against the wall. Some stared openly. Others watched through lowered lashes, the way people look at unstable machinery they have been told not to touch. A house guard with mirrored cheek plates shoved a folded black uniform into my hands as we reached an antechamber. "You wear this," he said. It was station livery with no insignia. No rank. No name. Just cloth cut to fit a function. A servant led me behind a screen. While I changed, I could hear them talking on the other side in voices they thought were too soft to carry. She chose him to provoke the Regency. She chose him because she is finally broken. She chose him because humans are simple to manipulate. That one earned a low laugh. I stepped out wearing their black uniform and my own boots. The servant who took my prison tunic held it between 2 fingers like it might stain the room by memory alone. My old shoulder wound pulled when I moved. Someone had cleaned it during transit, but not well. The bandage underneath was stiff with dried antiseptic and old blood. One escort noticed my wince and smiled. Good. Hurt men were easier to bury in official language. They brought me to the restricted inner wing and made a show of the rules. Where I could stand, which doors I could not touch, which corridor I would die in if I ran. The threat was delivered 3 different ways by 3 different mouths, which told me the same thing repeated under protocol often enough becomes fear. At the final archway, a tall female. Blue light spilled across the final archway like cold water poured over polished bone. The air smelled faintly metallic, sterilized too often, as if fear itself had a protocol here. The tall female waiting beneath the arch wore morning gray silk under a ceremonial cuirass. Not a servant. Not quite a soldier either. The kind of person bred to carry secrets from one locked room to another. She noticed the way I favored my left side and smiled with professional contempt. "Prisoner's limp," she said. "It reassures people." Then she stepped aside. I saw Princess Lyra Vale for the first time without a cord around her. The chamber beyond was too quiet for royalty. No musicians. No drifting attendants. No perfume thick enough to smother thought. Just a long room of pale stone, hanging lamp orbs dimmed to twilight, and a wall of transparent alloy looking out across the station's night side. Stars burned there like pinholes stabbed through black silk. The suite felt less like luxury than containment arranged by someone with exquisite taste. Lyra stood near the viewing wall with her hands folded behind her back. Pale skin. Silver-white hair braided close at the temples. A thin circlet at her throat instead of a crown, as if they had stripped rank from her in every way but the one that still frightened them. She didn't turn when the escort announced me. She waited until the door sealed. Only then did she look at me. Up close, I understood why a room full of predators might hesitate around her. Not because she looked dangerous. Because she looked like someone who already knew exactly how dangerous everyone else was. The escort lingered 1 second too long. Lyra didn't raise her voice. "Leave us." A pause. A calculation. Then the woman bowed and obeyed. I listened to the locks engage in sequence after she was gone. 3 layers. Mechanical, magnetic, then field. Not to keep intruders out, I thought. To make sure witnesses arrived late. I stayed where they had placed me. Chains at wrists. Shock collar still cold against my neck. I kept my stance neutral and my breathing even. "You chose badly," I said. "No," Lyra replied. "I chose the only person in this station whom no one believes I trust." That was not an answer meant to flatter. It was a blade slipped under the ribs with care. She crossed the room slowly, bare feet silent on the stone. There was no softness in the movement. House arrest had not broken her posture. If anything, it had refined it. "I did not select you out of pity, Elias Voss." Hearing my name in her voice felt stranger than hearing sentence or rank. The Empire liked names only when they were attached to records, punishments, graves. She stopped close enough for me to see a thin line of discoloration along her right wrist. Old restraint bruising, healed badly beneath expensive skincare. So the princess had chains too. Better hidden once. Then why? I asked. Her eyes moved once to the viewing wall, to the darkness beyond the stars, then back to me. Because someone will try to kill me before dawn. The room did not change. The lamps stayed dim. The station hum stayed low and constant. But every line in the suite rearranged itself in my head at once. Doors, sidelines, shadows, distances, decorative screens wide enough to hide a body. Vent grills too narrow for a man, large enough for tools. The tray on the side table. Ceramic pitcher, glass stem, metal fruit knife, blunted for court use, but still useful if pressed hard enough. I looked at her throat circlet, the sleeping chamber behind the inner lattice, the sealed side corridor where attendants would come and go. You know who? I know there will be more than one hand involved, she said. I know the order was not issued openly. I know if I accuse the wrong faction, they will call me unstable and move me to a quieter prison. I know if I survive until morning with proof, certain people lose their chance. That word mattered. Chance. Not revenge. Not drama. Timing. You picked a war captive because I'm disposable, I said. I picked you because you are observant, disciplined under humiliation, and hated by all the correct people. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Anyone else know you suspect an attempt? No. Anyone see you warn me? No. So if this goes wrong, I die first and you die officially after. That, she said, was always true for you. There it was. No false comfort. No noble speech. Just the shape of the board laid bare between us. I studied her face for fear and found something worse for the people hunting her, preparation. Why believe I won't hand you over? I asked. Lyra reached up, touched the control at my collar, and the restraint light went dark with a soft click. Not removed, not harmless, but no longer primed to punish every sharp breath. Because men planning betrayal don't keep counting exits while pretending not to, she said. And because when the court mocked a starving servant in the selection hall, you were the only one who moved your ration toward him before the guards stopped you. I hadn't known she'd seen that. For the first time since the chains went on, I felt something colder than fear settle into place. Trust was not what she had offered me. Purpose was. Tell me everything, I said. Warm air drifted from the wall vents, carrying the faint scent of resin, ozone, and flowers bred to bloom without soil. Somewhere beyond the curved glass, station engines hummed through the metal like a giant asleep with one eye open. I stood in the middle of Princess Lyra Vale's private chamber and let the room tell me what her mouth hadn't yet. The suite was too beautiful to be honest. Pale stone panels, silk screens thin as shed skin, a low table set with untouched fruit and a knife decorative enough to be useless. 3 doors visible, one sealed by a biometric lattice, one leading to an antechamber. One narrow servant passage disguised in the wall grained badly enough that I only noticed it because someone wanted it overlooked, not hidden. Lyra watched me notice it. She had changed nothing about the way she held herself. Straight spine, hands folded, face calm enough to pass for indifference in a court that probably mistook stillness for weakness. But now there was purpose in the silence between us. Not distance. Measurement. Begin, she said. So I did. I told her what prison leaves in a man after it takes everything else first. How discipline stops being virtue and becomes architecture. How you sleep with one ear open. How you count footsteps without meaning to. How you learn that kindness shown in public is usually bait, and cruelty done politely is still cruelty. She asked no soft questions. Not where I was born. Not whether I had family. She asked how long I could stay awake without chemical aid. Which hand I trusted when injured. Whether I had ever killed in darkness where I could not see a face. I answered all 3. Her gaze did not change, but her fingers tightened once against her own wrist. An alien tell, maybe. Or simply a woman hearing confirmation of the weapon she had requisitioned. Then she rose and crossed the chamber barefoot, pale skin catching the low gold light from the ceiling strips. Show me, she said. The room became a test. She moved attendants out with one command and sealed the suite herself. Then she altered variables one by one. Lights down, music on from hidden speakers. Vent speed increased until the silk screens whispered. She walked to different points in the room and asked, where would you place a shooter? What can poison touch first? If I were not the target, who would be? I stopped being a prisoner for long enough to become what I had been trained to be. The bed is wrong, I said first. That made her look at it. It draws the eye from every entrance. Too centered. Too ceremonial. Anyone taught to protect royalty would guard the room around it. Anyone trying to kill you would know that. I pointed toward the carved frame. And those canopy rods are hollow. She touched one. Heard the faint metallic difference. Her eyes sharpened. I kept going. The mirrors gave back too much of the room at once. The fruit had been replaced recently, but only the front pieces were fresh. The servant passage had no dust on the lower edge, which meant it had opened within the last station cycle. The antechamber brazier smelled faintly bitter beneath the perfume oil. Not enough to kill by air, but enough to mask another compound. She listened. Really listened. That was rarer than rank. Something clicked inside the wall. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a tiny metal note under the engine hum. Almost polite. The kind of sound a room made when it believed no one important was listening. I raised one hand without looking at Lyra. She went still at once. That alone told me more than any confession could. She had been waiting for this. The chamber lights were low, fed through pearl glass ribs that turned everything soft and false. Beyond the curved window, the station's distant shield arc flashed once across the black. Inside, nothing moved except the thin white curtains stirring over the vent slits and the slow blue pulse of the brazier near the antechamber. I listened, not for footsteps. A trained killer on a royal station would know better than to walk like a man in a corridor. I listened for interruption, air moving where air should not, fabric brushing polished stone, a rhythm too careful to belong to servants. There, a whisper from above the servant passage. I crossed the floor without speaking. The chain still hanging from my right wrist had enough slack to look ceremonial now, but it gave a faint drag against my skin when I moved fast. I hated the sound. So did whoever was hidden in the wall. Lyra stood near the inner dais, pale in the low light, one hand resting on the carved rail beside her sleeping alcove. She did not call for guards. Good. If she had, we would have had noise, confusion, witnesses, and a killer who could vanish back into silk and rank. I reached the fruit table first. Fresh on top, older beneath. I slid my fingers under the silver tray and found the real thing hidden there. A filament line, clear as frozen breath, stretched from the tray's foot to the lower hinge of the side panel. One tug from inside the passage, and the tray would tip. Harmless by itself. Distracting. Enough to draw eyes, turn a body, open a throat. My gaze moved to the brazier. The bitter scent was stronger now. Not poison meant for the room. Marker smoke. A masking agent. It would cover the sharper trace of charge burn when the weapon fired. Clever. I looked up at the vent lattice above the alcove and saw darkness where darkness should have been uniform. A narrow tube. Ceramic. No gleam. No reflection. Someone had built a silent dart projector into the shadow line and aimed it at the exact place Lyra's neck would be if she stepped forward at the sound of falling metal. I did not think. Training is what remains when time is removed. I ripped the chain from my wrist ring hard enough to tear skin, wrapped the loose length once around my fist, and hurled the fruit tray across the chamber. Silver struck stone. The hidden line snapped taut. The side panel shivered open a hand's width. A breath later, something hissed from the vent. The dart punched into the tray with a wet, hard tick. I was already moving. I hit the servant panel shoulder first before it could close. Bone jarred. The opening trapped my left arm, then gave. A body recoiled in the dark beyond, slimmer than I expected, fast, gloved, carrying no scent except sterile oil and old fabric. Court-trained, not military. The assassin drove a blade low toward my gut. The first hiss came from the vent, thin as steam and twice as cold. It was not the sound that changed the room. It was the silence after it, the kind that made every polished surface feel like a listening ear. I drove my shoulder into the servant panel and felt the frame bite back. Metal sang through my bones. The opening widened just enough for me to get my arm free, and the assassin inside tried to vanish into the dark. Too late. Not military. I knew that in the way the body moved before the mind could name it. Court-trained. Fast hands. Clean blade. No wasted breath. The knife came low for my gut, and I caught the wrist instead of the steel, twisting hard until something in the joint gave a small, wet pop. The figure made no cry. That told me more than a shout would have. trained to endure pain, trained to fail quietly. Behind me, Lyra's attendants had frozen in a line of silk and pale faces near the archway. One of them had a hand over her mouth. Another stood too straight, too still, as if stillness could hide guilt. The guards were slow to react, slow in a way that felt chosen. "Clear the wing," I said. My voice came out rough, low, and flat enough to cut through them. No one moved. Lyra stepped past them before they could stop her. She wore no crown, only a soft robe the color of moonlit bone, and in that moment she looked less like a princess than a blade left on velvet. Her eyes went once to the assassin, once to me, and then past both of us to the corridor outside. "Who else is in my house?" she asked. No one answered. That was answer enough. The assassin tried for the second blade with the free hand. I slammed them into the wall. The impact rattled a display niche. A glass flower broke somewhere nearby with a sound like ice under a boot. The figure sagged, not dead, but spent. A tiny capsule rolled from the sleeve and tapped the floor. Lyra saw it too late to stop herself. "Do not touch." The capsule split with a soft flash. Not fire, not smoke. A bloom of silver dust poured into the air, fine as powdered bone, and every guard in the hall recoiled at once. I covered Lyra with my body before I thought about it. The dust hit my shoulders, my neck, my tongue. Bitter, metallic. I heard one of the attendants begin to retch. Another stumbled backward, eyes watering, blind with panic. Not poison. A marker. A signal. Somewhere in the station, someone now knew the strike had failed. And someone else had wanted that to happen. Lyra's hand closed on my sleeve. Light, but not uncertain. "They are closing the doors," she said, watching the corridor seals descend one by one. Not to protect me, to isolate us. I looked at the fallen capsule, the dust still drifting in the air like a curse with manners. The first assassin was only a knife. This was a net. The attendants had already begun to separate without being told, each one drifting to a different wall, a different shadow, a different distance from Lyra. One guard took a step toward me with his hand near his sidearm. Another looked away too quickly. Fear had changed shape. A shaft of pale station light cut through the drifting dust, turning it silver for a breath. The corridor outside Lyra's chambers had gone too quiet. Even the vents seemed to hold their breath. Somewhere far down the wing, a footstep landed once, then stopped. Not a servant's pace. Not a guard's either. Measured. Patient. The kind of sound that belonged to someone who had already picked the moment of the kill. I kept my eyes on the attendants first. Fear had not made them run. That would have been simpler. It had made them polite. Two had drifted to the carved wall panels as if they were admiring the art. One had lowered her gaze with her hands folded so neatly they looked broken. Another stood beside the doors with the stillness of a statue, but her knuckles were pale around the edge of a service tray. Each one was trying to become scenery. That was the problem with courtiers. They knew how to disappear while staying in plain sight. Lyra remained in the center of the room, light catching the fine white seams of her gown, her face unreadable behind the calm she had learned for other people's comfort. Her eyes found mine once. Not a plea, a command. So I moved. I crossed to the inner threshold and pressed my palm to the seam of the wall panel beneath the lamp. The stone gave back a faint vibration. Not structural, mechanical, a service channel. Old palace work, the kind built for cleaning drones and secret hands. I slid my fingers along the edge until I found the hairline gap, then looked up just as a shadow moved behind the decorative lattice above us. Too late for stealth. The first assassin dropped from the maintenance crawlspace without a sound, wrapped head to toe in matte cloth, a thin wire already looped between both hands. Core-trained. Surgical. The wire flashed once in the light, aimed for Lyra's throat. I caught the wrist before it reached her. Bone hit bone. The shock climbed my arm. The killer twisted, fast as a snapped cable, and drove an elbow into my ribs. I took the pain and shoved harder, slamming him into the wall hard enough to rattle the lamp. The wire tore free and hissed across the floor like a silver snake. That was when the second wave hit. Not from above. From the door. It burst inward with a crash of metal and shouted protocol. 3 palace security officers in formal armor, trying to look legitimate, while moving like men who had rehearsed this in secret. One carried a stun baton. One had a compact pulse pistol already leveled at the room. The third never raised his weapon at all. He went straight for Lyra. That told me everything. I kicked the wire assassin's knee sideways, heard the joint go wrong, then drove him into the floor. He stopped fighting only when my forearm pinned his throat, and the air left him in one wet gasp. The pulse pistol barked. Blue light exploded off the doorway frame. Heat slapped my cheek. A portrait shattered behind Lyra in a spray of crystal and gilded dust. She did not scream. She stepped back once, just enough to keep the line of fire broken, and grabbed the edge of the writing desk with both hands until her knuckles showed white through her skin. Good. Burnt propellant hung in the air, sharp and metallic, under the sweeter note of shattered lacquer from the ruined portrait frame. Dust drifted through the blue afterglow of the pulse shot and turned the room unreal for half a second, like the station itself had stopped breathing to listen. I did not. The shooter in the doorway fired again from the hip. Bad angle. Too much hurry. I kicked the dying man at my feet into the line of fire, and the blue bolt chewed through silk, flesh, and carved door trim in one blinding flash. The gunman flinched. That was all I needed. I crossed the distance before he could correct, caught his wrist with both hands, and slammed it into the bronze edge of the wall screen. Bone gave. The pistol clattered across the floor. He tried to go for my throat with his other hand. Court fighter, not soldier. Fast. Clean nails. Scented oil on the cuff. I drove my forehead into his face and felt cartilage fold. He dropped to one knee. Alive, Lyra said. Not loud. Not panicked. An order. So I did not kill him. I tore the sash from a dead attendant, bound the shooter's ruined wrist to the lattice support by the doorway, then ripped open his outer sleeve. Beneath the formal silk, stitched into the lining where a servant would never look twice, was a narrow strip of gray conductive mesh. Access cloth. Authorized for internal maintenance corridors and sealed service doors. Not an outsider, then. Not even a smuggled blade in the dark. Someone had opened the palace to its own murder. Behind me, Lyra moved at last. Not away from the blood. Toward the writing desk. Her hands were steady now. She touched a panel hidden under the carved lip, and a soft amber display bloomed across the wood. Names. Schedules. Corridor seals. Household rotations. She had known where to look. You were making a list? I said. I was narrowing one, she answered. That landed harder than the gunfire. The bound man spat red onto the floor and laughed through a broken nose. Too late. Lyra did not look at him. No. Just in time. She turned the display toward me. 3 route changes in one night. 2 ceremonial guards reassigned. 1 VIN inspection logged under a dead clerk's authorization code. Every alteration touched the same office without appearing to. Chamberlain's registry. Seal office. Household provisioning. Small places. Polite places. Places no one watched because power liked to dress itself in uniforms and banners, not ledgers. Who benefits if you die before dawn? I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine, pale and cold and awake. Not the man who wears the crown. The man who intends to hold his hand when he signs. The bound assassin smiled with blood on his teeth. Confirmation. I crouched in front of him. Name. He stayed silent. So Lyra stepped closer, silk brushing broken crystal. The room changed when she did. Not because she raised her voice. Because she didn't. You failed, she said. That means they already prepared to erase you. His smile faltered. She touched the gray mesh in his sleeve with one finger. Maintenance access from the Chamberlain's seal office. Vent gas from household provisioning. Fire lane override from the inner watch. 3 methods. 3 teams. None of them speaking to the others unless one coordinator sat above them all. A breath. Morning arrived first as a change in color. The station's night blue glass slowly thinned toward pearl, and the lamps in Lyra's chambers lowered themselves in response, as if even the circuitry knew court was about to pretend none of the blood on the floor mattered. The dead servant from the gas line was gone. The 2 others were not. One lay under a silk drape near the writing desk. The other was still folded in the corridor where he had fallen, boots toward the threshold like he had tried to crawl back into rank before dying. I stood beside the princess when the inner doors opened. They came in wearing authority-like armor. Chamberlain Saren in layered gray. Captain Dareth of the inner watch with 6 armed guards behind him. 2 nobles I did not know, faces smooth and careful. No one looked at the bodies first. They looked at me. Of course they did. Step away from Her Highness, Dareth said. I heard the scrape of pulse carbines unlocking. Lyra did not move. No, one word. Flat. Final. Dareth's jaw tightened. Saren's expression stayed almost bored, which told me more than panic would have. Men who feared discovery watched the room. Men who believed they still controlled it watched the witness. Saren folded his hands into his sleeves. Your Highness, this confusion is regrettable. The human has clearly turned the night into slaughter. For your safety, he will be removed. Removed. Clean word. Palace word. Better than executed. Easier on breakfast. I looked at the gray mesh strip Lyra had taken from his office runner's sleeve and set beside the ruined frame. Dareth noticed my glance and shifted half a step, blocking one of the guards from seeing it. That was enough. Men lied with their mouths. Institutions lied with their feet. Lyra's voice stayed low. Then explain the maintenance seal on your office mesh. Silence hit the room harder than a shot. Saren did not even look at the strip. Fabric can be stolen. She pointed at the vent grill. Provisioning gas keyed to household channels. Then at the scorched frame and the corridor beyond. And a fire lane override only Inner Watch could open during sealed hours. Now everyone looked at Dareth. His hand drifted toward his sidearm by reflex. Not to draw. To reassure himself it was there. Guilt-like contact. I spoke before he could build a better lie. 3 teams. 3 entry methods. None coordinated at ground level. They were compartmentalized. Whoever built it sat above all 3 departments or had access to all 3 seals. Saren finally turned his eyes to me. Cold. Measuring. A prisoner's analysis. No, Lyra said. A guard's. That changed the room. Not because of law. Because of witness. Because everyone present had heard her say it. Dareth moved first. Fast enough to prove training. Wrong target. He went for Lyra, not me, hands snapping out for the short needler hidden inside his sleeve. He wanted 1 dead princess and 1 blamed prisoner before anyone could think. He never reached her. The nearest of his own guards slammed the butt of a carbine into his wrist with a crack sharp as breaking glass. The needler spun across the marble. Another guard drove Dareth to his knees. Not loyalty to me. Not courage blooming from nowhere. Just survival. Once Lyra had named me her guard in front of witnesses, the line was clear.